Welcome to Landscape Photo Editing Sessions. I'm Rayata Arcuri. In this episode, I'm going to be showing you my processing workflow for a Milky Way panorama. So it's about time for the Milky Way season, and I shot this around the beginning of February at Volcanoes National Park in Hawaii. So I used the Rokinon 24mm 1.4 on a Sony a7S. So to take this panorama, I used a stable tripod. I made sure the tripod was level by using the built-in bubble level on my tripod, and then I shot it from left to right. So I overlapped each image by around half the frame, and I went from left to right. So each exposure is 20 seconds at ISO 12800. I shot it at such a high ISO so that I could get details in the shadow, and even though the sky is so bright, I didn't clip any of the highlights in the sky, so I'll be able to bring this down in Photoshop and Lightroom. So to create a panorama, I'm going to use Lightroom's built-in panorama feature, and all I have to do beforehand is remove the vignette and the distortion. And I can do the editing after because Lightroom will create a DNG file that's basically equivalent to RAW. So I'm going to go to my lens correction and go to the Rokinon lens correction, and then it's going to do a 14mm. I actually like using the 14mm preset on the 24mm because it does a good job of getting rid of the vignette. So I'm going to make sure I do this on all the photos. I'm just going to copy and paste the settings. Okay, now that all the vignettes are removed, I'm going to make sure all of the files are selected, and I'm going to right click and go to Photo Merge and create Panorama. So it's going to automatically select which projection method it wants to use, and also if I want to do any other settings. So I'm just going to leave it on auto, and it looks good to me. There's not much, there's actually no distortion really. I'm also going to use this boundary warp feature, which will get rid of the edges, the white edges. It'll automatically warp the edges so that there's no white edges, okay? Alright, so I'm going to merge that, and it's going to create a DNG RAW file. I'm going to go to the panorama that I just created, and what I want to do to this file is fix the white balance, bring out the Milky Way more, and also bring out more detail in the shadows. So the first thing about white balance, I'm just going to make the temperature cooler. And the sky is way too bright right now, so I'm just going to bring down the exposure on this a little bit. And then I'm going to bring the shadows up, because I still want to have some of those details in the shadow, but not too much because it's a little bit noisy. I'm also going to bring up the blacks a little bit to get more detail out of there. I'm going to bring up the whites, and that'll bring out more contrast in the sky. And also reduce the highlight, so that'll bring down the overall exposure of the sky. And with my contrast, I'm just going to bring it up a little bit. I still want to retain the shadow detail in the crater over here. In case you're wondering, this red light, it's coming from the active crater over here. So the lava lake is sending a glow of light, and then there's some clouds above it, and that light is reflecting onto these trees and the hill right here. So I'm not happy with the white balance yet. I'm going to make it a bit more cooler. I'm going to increase the vibrance and saturation a little bit to assist me with the white balance. So I'm trying to neutralize the colors a little bit. So it was a little bit too much purple or magenta. I brought it to the green and it fixed it a little bit. Alright, I think that looks good, and I'm just going to bring the vibrance up to around 40, so that'll bring out more color in the Milky Way. And I'm just going to zoom in all the way here and get rid of some of the noise. So I'm going to go to my luminance slider and bring that up. Alright, I think that looks good. And it doesn't deplete too much of the detail. Maybe 25. Alright. I'm gonna bring this into Photoshop now. In Photoshop, I want to punch up the contrast of the Milky Way. I also want to increase the contrast of the shadows area. And there's a few color corrections over here. So there's a color cast in this corner over here. There's also a bit of blurry plants over here. I want to clone that out. And I want to do some dodging and burning around the sky area. So to start off, I'm going to create luminosity mask. So that will allow me to create selections of the brightness, various brightness on the area of the image. So the first thing I want to do is create a new layer. I'm going to clone out this plant over here. So I'm just going to use the spot healing brush, size it up, and then just brush it along these plant areas. And there's just one more right there. Alright, that's pretty good. And maybe these hot pixels over here too. I'm just going to clone those out. Okay, that looks good. The next thing I want to do is get rid of this color cast over here. So to do that, I'm going to create a new layer and change the layer blending mode to color. I'm going to go to my brush tool and sample a color from somewhere in the image that has the correct color I want to use. So this is kind of a grayish color. I'm going to make sure that layer is selected, and using a low opacity, like 30%, I'm going to size up the brush a little bit. I'm going to paint along the areas with the color cast. And that should do a good job of removing the color cast. So over here, these trees are kind of green, so I'm just going to choose the color around here and then make sure these edges of the trees are the right color. Alright, I'm going to toggle the visibility on and off, and that made a big difference. So it's a lot better now. So I'm going to zoom in here, toggle it on, and so it removed that color cast. So the next thing I want to do is bring out more contrast in the Milky Way. So I'm going to zoom in here. I'm going to create a curve adjustment layer. And then I'm going to use my targeted adjustment tool and go to my Milky Way. So the brightest part of the Milky Way is this area over here. So I'm going to click. I'm going to bring it up to a good level. So I want it to be that bright. And then I'm going to go to a dark area of the Milky Way, like over here, and bring that down. Alright, so that just brought out a lot of contrast in the Milky Way, and you can see it a lot better now. But the problem now is that this area is too dark, so I want to mask it out. And that's why I create those luminosity masks. So these luminosity masks select areas of the image based on the brightness values. So I'm going to go to my darks areas. So I think darks 4 will be a good selection of the dark parts. I'm going to press Ctrl H to hide the selection. And then I'm just going to use a white brush or a black brush, opacity at 100%, and brush along the foreground. Alright, I'm going to alt click on the layer mask thumbnail, and this will bring up the preview. So I want to make sure I don't brush out any of the sky, so I'm making sure not to get too much of the brush on the sky. Alright, that's pretty good now, and I'm just going to deselect by pressing Ctrl D, and then I can paint in the rest of the bits that went unpainted. I also don't really like the brightness decreasing in the steam vents over here, so I'm just gonna size down the brush and alt click again, use a lower opacity, and then brush some of those fog out of here. Alright, that looks good. Alright, the next thing I want to do is bring up the contrast in the foreground without losing too much shadow detail. So I can do that by creating a curve adjustment, and then I'm going to go to a darker part of the shadows. So around here it's pretty dark. I'm going to make a click, and then I'm going to go to a brighter part like over here, and then actually bring it up. So you can notice the brighter parts have more contrast now, and the dark parts are still the same brightness. So what I'm going to do is select this part of the image, so it's just the foreground. So I Control click, it's actually going to select the sky, and then select this layer and fill it with black. So Alt and delete, and that'll fill it. So I'm just going to do it one more time, Alt delete, and that'll get rid of the rest of the sky. And now there's a good contrast boost in the shadows. And this image is looking pretty good already. So I just want to do a bit of dodging and burning and a bit more color work, and that'll be it. So I'm going to create a dodge and burn layer by creating just a new layer and changing the blend mode to soft light. And then I can use the regular black and white brush. And black will be my burn, and dodge, and my white will be dodge. So I just want to use the dodge on the Milky Way a bit. So I'm going to go to my right brush and change the opacity to around 10%. I'm also going to go to my luminosity mask channels and select maybe brights 2. So I want to target the brighter parts of the Milky Way. Select my dodge and burn layer, hide that selection with Control H, and then paint along the Milky Way. So the areas I want to brighten up. Alright, I'm going to switch brushes. I'm going to select my black brush. And then start burning the dark areas. Oh, first I need to deselect the brights channel and then go to my darks channel. So darks 3 looks like a good selection. Control H to hide the selection, and then start painting that area of the Milky Way. Alright, I'm going to deselect the selection and I'm going to toggle this on and off. So that made a bit of a difference. So it's a little bit more contrast. And then I'm just going to fix some of the dark areas. The top of the sky is a little bit dark, so I'm just going to size the brush up. Use a white brush and even lower the opacity just a little bit more to around 5%. And then just going to paint the top part of the sky. I also want to brighten up maybe some of this. Nah, it's already quite noisy, so I'm not going to try to brighten that up. Alright, so that looks pretty good. So I'm going to go back to my color correction layer and fix some of the color over here because it's quite noisy and some of that color is created from the noise. So I'm going to sample the area over here, make sure my opacity is around 30%, and then fix the color of these fog over here. Alright, that's pretty good. Alright, the next thing I want to do is do some color adjustments. So I'm going to add a curve adjustment layer. I'm going to change the blending mode to color so it only affects the color. And then I want to bring up the blue channel in the shadows. So I'm going to go to my bottom point and just bring it up a little bit. And then I'm going to go to my top point and bring it down a little bit. So that'll balance out. It'll take away some of the blues and the highlights. I also see a red, kind of too much red in the shadows. So I'm going to go to my red channel and just going to take that down to the left just a little bit on the shadows. And then to the right, to the left a little bit on the highlights, and then on the shadows is to the right. Okay, I'm happy with the image now, and the final thing I'm going to do to it is add a vignette. So to create a vignette, I'm just going to select an oval area of the area I want the vignette to be. So the vignette's actually going to be around this selection. So I'm just selecting the area that isn't going to have the vignette. And then create a curve adjustment. I'm going to invert and then bring it down to the amount of vignette I want. I'm going to click on the layer mask thumbnail and then bring up the feathering. Alright, that might be just a little bit too much, so I'm just going to bring the opacity down on this layer itself. And maybe less feathering. Alright. Alright, so that's about it. And so from the start, this is processed right out of Lightroom. And then I added a layer to get rid of the plants that were out of focus in the foreground. And then I did some color correction, or more like getting rid of color cast. So in the corner there was a purple color cast. By using a blending mode of color, I can select the color I want and then paint it along the areas where the color cast are. The next step was to fix the contrast in the sky, or bring out the contrast and the Milky Way. So I used a luminosity mask to select out the foreground and mask it out. The next thing I want to do is increase the contrast in the shadows area, and I just took the sky selection from this and applied it to there. The next thing I did was some dodging and burning to bring out more detail in the Milky Way. Finally, I did some color correction and some styling, so I want to bring out more blue in the shadow. And finally, a vignette to wrap it off, and this will pull the viewer's eye into the Milky Way. Alright, so that's about it. And if you found this video useful, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. And thanks for watching.